let's go over one of the cooler features in resolution we call SPL Distribution Chart. Those of you who use ease may be familiar with the way this window is laid out. This is a really invaluable tool for those of you who are looking to determine if you have even coverage throughout a venue that you've just designed in resolution. Let's jump right into it and open up the window. Before I do, it's important to note that you want to make sure all of your surfaces are fully mapped before opening this window. If you open previous to that, you're not going to have all the data points you use for an accurate readout, and therefore the window will just show up empty, letting you know that it's still calculating. So wait for all the surfaces to map, and then go to Tools, and then SPL Distribution Chart. And what you have are results off to the right, and to the bottom you have a configuration tool or a couple of configuration options, as well as a couple of view options. It will change the way that you're able to view and analyze the data. I'm going to start with sampling. So sampling will allow you to change the amount of reference points that are on every coverage area that you're mapping. So every coverage area, at least as it is now, how it's defaulted here is 1.6 feet. So every 1.6 feet, there's a reference point. We can change that. Think of this as resolution. If you look towards the results under interpolation, you can see the count right now is 1250. What if I were to change that to 1 and then update? My count has now jumped to 3376. So now there's more reference points to analyze, and therefore the results you get back will be a little bit more detailed. So the more spacing you have, think of it as lesser resolution, and the lesser spacing you have, think of it as more resolution. We'll leave this as 1, and let's jump up to results next. And then we'll talk about how you can customize how you're viewing this data. So the average is your average SPL in the venue, which is 104.9. Standard deviation is a metric that's essentially how many, the spread of SPL samples as it relates to the average. And this isn't really a metric we analyze, but it is a data point we use to determine 90% of the coverage in resolution. So we'll talk about that in a moment, but that is a data point we're using to calculate more data that we do tend to use more when we're analyzing. So we also have minimum and maximum SPL. So our minimum is 100.3 decibels. Our maximum SPL is 108.6 decibels. And here's that 90% of SPL I was referring to. So this is probably the most useful section in this whole window, because as application engineers here at EAW, we want to make sure that 90% of the venue is within plus or minus 3 dB. This translates directly to even coverage throughout the whole venue. So looking here, we're at plus or minus 2.8 decibels, so we're within that range. This meets our standards, we're happy with that. It lets us know the low and the high at 90%, and you can see there that we're definitely within that plus or minus 3 dB. Beneath that is 100% SPL, where we're plus or minus 4.3. This could actually be interpolated as keeping energy off the walls, keeping energy from the back of the room. A lot of times you're going to want some of that sound energy to taper off as you get closer to hard surfaces. So that's why we're more focused on the 90% versus the 100%. And then directly beneath that, we have interpolation, which it's letting us know this was done as the best interpolation. So I'm going to close this window temporarily. And I'm going to, for those of you who are new to resolution, I want to go over what interpolation actually is. So under options, you have SPL interpolation, we have fastest, normal, and best. And so fastest is going to give you a less defined readout, but it will be quicker in coming back with the mapping. So this might be better if you have a lot of arrays and a lot of surfaces and you need to get results quicker. Fastest might be the best way to go. Just keep in mind that's not the most detailed, especially between transition points. So it's not the most accurate readout. Next is normal. This is right in the middle of the road, so a little bit slower and a little bit more defined. And then you have best, which is obviously the slowest, but the most defined and the most accurate transitions. So going back to SPL Distribution Chart, let's now focus on different ways that you can view this data. So you have a minimum and maximum range under distribution, and this is essentially just changing your view. So if you wanted to only see what was between 101.3 and 107.9, you can do that by either manually typing in those values or clicking these up and down arrows. You can change the spacing in between each one of these readouts. So if you wanted to see every 2 decibels versus every 1, just type in 2, hit enter, and now you're looking in 2 dB increments. You can change the alignment to center, left, or right. This 90% 3 dB is going to show you that 90% of SPL in 3 dB increments. So if I click that, it's automatically going to change to those 3 dB increments from your minimum to your maximum. If you wanted to go back to viewing the entire range of your SPL readouts or your SPL samples, click Fit Range, and you're back to where you started. Under Chart, you can stick with the bar chart. Auto's default, and most times it's going to default to the bar. If you wanted to look at more of a line diagram, simply click Line. And now this is a line chart of your SPL readouts. You can change the smoothing level by clicking these up and down arrows. Here are some data points that are shown by default. If you don't want to see those data points, especially if you're smoothing out the line chart, you can choose not to show data points and then just look at the line. We'll switch this back to auto. Now, if you wanted to export your data to maybe share with a client or share with your team, you can export this data by right-clicking on the chart and selecting Export Chart. Here, you can change your width and your height, the units if you want to go by inches as opposed to pixels. You can copy to a clipboard. You can save to file. A couple different ways you can export this to clipboard will allow you to copy and paste maybe onto a PowerPoint presentation or a Word document, or you can save it as a file. We'll call this example charts for now. We'll save this to the desktop and then click Save. So if you wanted to access this later, we could go back to our desktop. Here we see our example chart. Double click on that. And there it is. All of our data that was exported, it contains all of the results over here towards the right. So this is something, again, that you could present to either a client, a customer, or just share with your team.